These notes are on composition of functions next steps. This is building on what we did in Module 1 of Math 3 and Module 4 of Math 2, and also in Module 4 of Math 1. So when we talk about building, we talk about starting with x and ending with this function. So the first thing I do to build this function is I subtract 2. The next thing I do is I take the square root. I then multiply by 3. And then I add 10. So I could build this by having actually an original function of g of x equals x, and then a function where I subtract 2, a function where I take the square root, where I multiply by 3, and I add 10, and that would build me this function of f of x. So it's kind of interesting to think about these as actually compositions of functions. In fact, of 1, 2, 3, 4 different functions. The other way that you look at composition of functions in this module is they give you a bunch of functions. So f of x, g of x, h of x, j of x, and k of x. And then they ask you to rewrite a given function using these functions up here as compositions. So my innermost function here is, I start with x, but I don't have an x function. So then I need to check if I have an x plus 5 function, which I do, f of x. And then I square that, which is what we did to x and g of x. So I could rewrite m of x as g of f of x. Second example. Rewrite L of x, which is 3x squared plus 5, using our compositions up here. So we have an x squared, which is our g of x, so that's the first function we start with. We then multiply by 3, which is what we did with our h function. And then we add 5, which is what our f function does. So I could rewrite L of x as f of h of g of x. A of x equals 2 to the 3x. So in this case, it looks like I start with an x and I'm multiplying it by 3. So that would be h of x. And then I put that as the power on 2. So that's j. So a of x equals j of h of x. My last example, we'll call that b of x equals 2 to the x minus 1. So I have an x minus 1 right here, but it's underneath a square root, which means that if I start with k of x, to get it to be x minus 1, I'm going to have to square it. So that's the g of x. And then to make a power of 2 means I need j of x. So I could rewrite b of x as j of g of k of